in China last month, more than 50% of the cars sold were electric. For the first time in history anywhere in the country. Next 4 to 5 years, the battery prices will be half of what they are right now. We concluded that India has to electrify all its fleet, including two-wheeler, three-wheeler, buses, trucks, everything, between 2045 and 2050. The RWA, the distribution company, the transport department, no one can stop you from setting up a charging infrastructure. Absolutely, you should go ahead buy electric. Don't even think twice.
I think that's what we call in internet or Instagram language confirmation bias.
Exactly.
Ola Electric presents Green Bharat, an initiative by Network 18.
Are you also one of those car or motorcycle lovers who isn't too optimistic about electric vehicles? Thinking like, what about electricity from coal or pollution from old batteries or mining? Or an enthusiast who thinks that EVs are going to solve our mobility and environmental issues? Or a fence sitter who is sitting with a calculator if EVs make sense at all? Will I find the chargers when I really need them? Will my RWA or housing society allow me to put a charger or not? Am I going to get discounts on those installations or not? This conversation is for all of us. Hi everyone, I'm Sambhav. Welcome to Green Bharat, Road to Green Conversation, where we have Amit Bhatt with us. He's the Managing Director of ICCT, which is the International Council on Clean Transportation in India. Welcome, Amit.
Thanks a lot, Kranti. Nice to be here.
So, just a backgrounder on why this conversation with Amit. The thing is that Amit and I have had discussions on EVs in the past, and most of the time we approach the same topic from two different angles, two different aspects. I approach it from a very customer-centric, Aam Janta kind of concern, and Amit from a policy, global technology, and urban mobility point of view. That is precisely what I hope to achieve in this conversation, where I will ask fundamental but important questions on EVs as most of the Indian customers are asking, and some of them are apprehensive about adoption. They want to know about the policies, and they also want to know about the evolution of tech. So, Amit, shall we start?
Absolutely.
So, first thing first. Most of us are discussing this, softening or some fall in the sales of EVs globally. What's the reality?
So, it's completely myth.
Okay.
Because if you look at the newspaper headlines or on social media, you will say EV sales have crashed. It's not the case. EV sales are rising in Europe. EV sales are rising in China. EV sales are rising in Europe, in US. In fact, in China last month, more than 50% of the cars sold were electric. For the first time in history anywhere in the country, that you have seen more electric being registered than conventional powertrains.
Yeah.
So what has happened? What has happened is the rate of growth has slowed down. And that is largely because you had a lower base. So when you have a lower base, the rate of growth is high. But as the base expands, the growth comes down. So that is one. Secondly, what we have seen, especially in US and Europe, is because US bought this Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, which gives incentives for people to manufacture batteries and vehicles. And when these incentives were announced, a lot of repositioning of supply chain happened because companies wanted to take advantage of these incentives. And that is what happened in some delay in investment. So that is also the reason. But in absolute numbers, EV sales are skyrocketing everywhere across the world.
And what about the changing of batteries? I think that was also a concern as far as American customers are concerned.
So one of the initial questions was, what will happen after 150,000 kilometers or 8 years when I run out of my battery? So there are quite interesting things which are coming. One, I think we are underestimating the performance of these batteries. So in many cases, we have seen that the batteries outlast than what the initial commitment is there from the OEMs. So one is that batteries last longer. Secondly, which is very interesting, is the battery prices are coming down dramatically. And if you look at the recent forecast, next 4 to 5 years, the battery prices will be half of what they are right now. So let's say if I buy an electric car today, and let's say if 5 years down the line, I have to replace the battery, the price will not be what I am getting today. It will be less than that. So the battery replacement cost is what we are seeing people are exaggerating. It is not that big a deal right now.
So, in consumer or enthusiast point of view, I'll tell you one conversation which we keep seeing in this sphere is that all the electric cars which are like from luxury car makers, their after market or used car sales, the prices have gone down a lot. How do you see that?
So prices of cars in general, if you look at in India also, the prices have gone down. If you look at Nexon, so that price point that I bought 2.5 years back, it is cheaper than today. So today it is cheaper. So my resale value will always go down. So on one side, I am also slightly unhappy that, but I think there are a couple of reasons why the prices have come down. One, the battery prices have come down. So when the battery price comes down, and depending on what model you take, it could be anywhere between 35 to 50% of the cost will be the cost of the battery. So if the battery prices are coming down, the OEMs are passing that to the customers. Secondly, what we are seeing is that as the supply chain increases, you also distribute some of the overheads across a larger vehicle segment. So the prices will come down. So the reduction in prices on one side is good for a new customer, but slightly bad for an existing customer because the resale value goes down. But what is interesting, what we are seeing, especially in Norway, so Norway has about 90%, close to 90% sales are electric. They now have quite a vibrant second-hand electric car sale market, which is very vibrant and people are using it. Initially, there was also skepticism, will the vehicles perform, not perform? But given the way things are happening, people have a much stronger trust and focus on the electric, at least in some of these countries.
So one question or one query most of the customers have about battery life is that after 6, 7, 8 years, they generally think that that is the time to replace the battery. What's the reality? What kind of percentage or the range or charging capacity fall are we seeing after 7 to 8 years?
So some of the newer batteries that we are seeing right now, even after 7 to 8 years, they are almost at 90-95% level.
Okay.
So technically, you can still run your car. It's just that you will have a slightly lower drop in the range.
Right.
But even let's say if it goes down to let's say 80-85%, there is always a case for second use case for the battery.
Right.
So the battery from the vehicle can go into stationary storage. So you might resell these batteries for a price. And when the batteries outlast that period also, then you can also recycle as well. So there is a secondary use of the battery, and then there is a resale of the battery and recycling of the battery. Right now, we don't have enough batteries from the first application to gauge what will be the application in the second or third application. But as these numbers increase, we will see a more vibrant market, both from the second life of the battery as well as the recycling of battery.
But is it looking credible to you in the sense in India we see all the recycling conversation about plastics and everything, but we hardly see that happening. So you think that will happen with batteries?
I think so, because if you look at, so what we are looking at is a lead acid battery, right? It's a very difficult composition. A lot of recycling is happening. In fact, most of the lead acid batteries are recycled, but they're not really recycled in a way they should be. So a lot of it is informal recycling. And you can go to many places in Delhi, you can see informal recycling happening. But with advanced chemistry battery, I think this will not be the case because you have critical materials. These critical minerals are not happening in India. So we are not producing it. Right now, we are not even recycling or kind of
Processing
it. And so we are dependent on foreign countries. Once you start recycling it, you can keep these minerals in your jurisdiction. So if you look at Europe, Europe has come up with a regulation that prohibits export of used batteries. Why? Because they want to keep these critical minerals in their country. So once there enough batteries come, we will see a slightly more robust ecosystem of recycling. Also, largely because from the energy security perspective. And that, I think, is going to be main differentiator between an advanced chemistry cell battery versus a traditional lead acid battery.
Okay, so related question, you mentioned the minerals and the materials which are used in batteries. And the moment we talk about batteries and those materials, we end up talking about China's monopolies. How do you see that? Is it going to change in near future? Is it like with the different battery chemistries, are we going to see other hubs as well?
No, it's interesting because even if you look at China is a global a very dominant player in this space, because long backs when countries were making bets on the technology of future, China probably realized that battery electric could be a potential technology. So they really invested a lot, both in terms of R&D, but also sourcing materials doing long-term purchase contracts with other countries, and they have a very strong processing capacity. Now, other countries are now realizing that this transition is happening. So either they fast forward this R&D and investment, or they'll be left behind. So we are seeing battery plants coming up in Europe, in US, and Inflation Reduction Act that I talked about was a very important contributor to setting up these plants in the US. The same is now happening in India as well. So I think as the journey starts, we can definitely learn from some of these experiments, but we can also make some of these investment, and we can also do sourcing of these critical materials from other countries. Now, what is required to be done? One, so the battery chemistry is changing, but we now realize. So even if you look at the in the car space, we have moved largely towards LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate, and that we think is going to continue for some time, which is different from what NMC or some of the other chemistries were. But there is also a conversation happening on solid state batteries. There is a conversation happening on batteries which probably sodium ion batteries and so on and so forth. So it's a very evolving conversation. Everyone is trying to find that next critical mineral which can help on the energy security or address some of the geopolitics issue as well. And we will see something happening. But I think right now, I think both for energy security and this larger energy transition, batteries are going to be very, very important in this space.
So I also feel that many manufacturers or industry watchers might agree that their strategy also includes some sense of some portion of hope, where they're hoping that this new kind of technology will come, for example, solid state or sodium ion, and it will reduce the battery prices and everything. So how solid is that hope? I mean, is it going to happen, or any research which you can share?
So one, we did some research to understand that do we have enough critical materials to assume that automobile transition can happen towards battery electric. So what we did at ICC Tech global level, we looked at whatever available data on mines are available, and we projected demand, assuming that everything in the world transitions to electric. And we came up with a 2050 scenario. And we assessed that whatever mines are already announced, those mines are enough to power the global transition.
Okay.
Which means we don't think there will be shortage of critical minerals. So that's one. Secondly, as the technology improves, we are seeing lesser these critical minerals going into batteries. So batteries are becoming much more efficient. So even with the existing technologies, when you bring in efficiency, you require less amount of critical minerals. And then there is always this conversation of what's the next best chemistry.
Right.
So given all this development, I personally feel the prices of battery will go down, because let's say if you have a mine which produces lithium, what will you do with that lithium? Right? So you have to sell it. If someone else comes with a mine which produces lithium, he or she will also have to sell it. So then it becomes a competition. Who can sell more? And therefore the prices come down. So efficiency in the battery plus the competition in production of these critical minerals is what is driving the reduction in prices.
So that's interesting insight or data point you gave, that even with existing mines, whatever we have already discovered, you think that this will, or your data or your research says that is enough to power all the vehicles even if they are electrified, right?
Yes, and our research found only 50% of what will be used from these mines to power this transition.
Okay.
So we have enough critical minerals. That's the bottom line.
Okay, that's a headline, I guess. But coming back to the Indian scenario, now that question which I started with, what about the electricity generation? So right now we have more than 2/3 is coal powered. So how do we calculate whether EVs are actually, tailpipe emission is not there, but net result is better than the ICE vehicles or CNG vehicles?
Yeah. So we did this research a couple of years back to understand the entire well-to-wheel emission. So we looked at electric car, electric two-wheeler, and we also looked at conventional car and conventional two-wheelers. And we looked at whatever emission is there in production of this vehicle, in operation of this vehicle, and then the end of life of the vehicle. And we found that in two-wheeler case, with the existing grid, which is, as you said, 3/4 on fossil fuel, electric two-wheeler in India was found to be almost 40% less emission in terms of life cycle emission than a conventional two-wheeler
Okay.
with the existing grid.
So that means powered with the whatever is coal burning at the
Exactly.
plant. It is the transfer and then using it
Exactly.
to charge it.
Charge it, absolutely. And it also includes emission involved in production of these vehicles, including production of petrol
Understood.
and production of critical minerals and batteries and everything. So it's a complete life cycle emission. So electric two-wheeler had almost 40% less emission than conventional two-wheeler. Electric car, incidentally, had almost 19 to 29% lower emission.
Okay.
Now, this is with so what are we coming out with? So one is, even with India's predominant grid, which is based on coal, electric vehicles are cleaner in terms of life cycle emission. Tailpipe emissions, so absolutely it's zero, right? So that's one point. The second point is, if we start cleaning the grid, which means if we start pumping more renewables, this number will go down. So now what we get? So we get a pathway to clean transport system. And that pathway is you produce green electrons, which is renewable energy, solar, wind, pump hydro, so on and so forth. Once you get these green electrons, you can store that in a battery and you power your battery electric vehicles. Or you can use this electron to convert into a green molecule, which is green hydrogen. And then you can either come up with a hydrogen fuel cell, or you can use that in other form of energy. So we are now know what is the pathway to clean transport system. And that involves renewable energy plus battery energy storage.
And how do you see India's journey? Because government has been pushing for maybe 30% electrification by 2030, and we have seen some numbers, some new products and everything. So how do you see by 2030? Are we going to, see the market like?
Yeah, so I think if you look at India's commitment, by 2030 we will have more than 50% of installed capacity as renewables. So India is definitely pushing a lot of renewables. Going forward, I personally believe that the grid will get cleaner. So it's today 75% fossil fuel. Maybe in next 5-6 years it will be 60% or maybe 65%. And going forward it will. So government is actively pushing on cleaning the grid. And as we push more and more renewables, we will see even more benefit of electric vehicles than what we are seeing as of now.
And about the market ratio, you think electric vehicles would constitute around 30% by 2030?
So some of the initial assessment from the government was 30% by 2030. I think we need to do a lot to push, because if you look at an aggregate level, it's about 2% right now, electric vehicles numbers. And so this is where I think we have to do a lot more. So if you look at other countries on how they have achieved, even let's say China or Europe or US, there are two ways of pushing electrification. One is you subsidize, because there is a cost parity is not there in electric vehicles, at least the upfront cost parity. So schemes like FAME schemes, or now the PME drive, state EV policies, they subsidize. The second is a slightly tricky but very important, called supply side regulation. Now, supply side regulation, especially if you look at countries like Europe and US. So California has a mandate called ZEV sales mandate, which means they mandate OEMs to sell a certain percent of the fleet as electric. And that number changes over the course of years. So it does two things. One, let's say if you have to sell 5% of your fleet as electric, and the cost of this vehicle is high, you will bring down the cost a little bit, and you will offset by a conventional powertrain, increasing that cost a little bit.
Understood.
So that's the way they look about. Second is, Europe has something called greenhouse gas standards, which means they limit on what the tailpipe of the vehicles can come out, and therefore then OEMs have to play with their product, that to meet that level of emission, they have to add more electric. So these policies, if we can also include, we will see a much important uptake. Now, the question is, why are we pushing electrification? There are two reasons to it. One is the efficiency of an electric motor is far, far superior than an internal combustion engine. So purely from efficiency side, these vehicles are much more efficient. Second, you and I are in Delhi and we know the current air quality conversation, and almost 40% of the local emission in Delhi is from transport. So you cannot add more combustion. You have to shift away. And third is the climate commitment. So we did some analysis to understand. So India has committed to net zero by 2070. So we realized that how can India lead, the transport sector in India can meet the net zero target. And we concluded that India has to electrify all its fleet, including two-wheeler, three-wheeler, buses, trucks, everything, between 2045 and 2050 to meet the net zero target of 2070. So that's the way forward that we think India should follow.
Now some customer-centric questions. You mentioned PM E-Drive subsidy scheme. So eventually, at the ground level, what kind of subsidies the customers can see?
So I think a couple of interesting things which has happened with PM E-Drive. So definitely there is subsidy on two-wheelers. There is subsidy on charging infrastructure development. There is definitely subsidy on three-wheelers. Buses, huge amount of money has been allocated for buses. But we are seeing two interesting use cases coming out from this PM E-Drive announcement. One is trucks. So there is going to be subsidies for electric trucks, which I think could potentially be game changer for India. And I'll come to that why. And second is on ambulances. So there are two new vehicle segments that have been added. So for customers having two-wheelers, they will continue getting subsidies that they were getting under FAME. With charging infrastructure, we will see much more charging infrastructure coming in, so that will also benefit. But the reason why we are very excited with trucks is that trucks are about 2% of India's motor vehicle fleet. And they are responsible for almost 45 to 50% of emission from transport.
Wow.
So very small segment, almost half of transport emission. Until now, we have not been clear on what do we do with these trucks. But with the battery prices coming down, there is a very strong case of electrification of trucks. And we are already seeing some startups already running trucks in Delhi. So if you look at the Vahan database, there are about 350 odd trucks, electric trucks already being registered.
Okay.
With a little bit of nudge and push, we can see much more electrification possibility in trucks.
Cool. That's interesting data, eye-opening data. One question which we keep getting from many of my viewers is like, how can we get RWA or housing society to get the chargers installed? Because the new societies, they have included that in their whatever master plan blueprint. But the old societies, retrofitting, at times they are like, many users, they face this some kind of pushback that we will not allow electric cars or bikes to be charged here. There's some security, safety issue and everything. So how can they approach this issue?
Very interesting question. A question which I've been struggling for 2.5, 3 years now. I've been also trying to convince my RWA housing society to allow setting up charging in my parking. I've still not been able to convince them. So, and again, lack of awareness, lack of understanding. So while we have community charging, but now the vehicles are growing. So it's very difficult to organize a community charging. So what can be done? I think, to me, the big learning is from Norway. So Norway has something called right to charge, which means if you have an electric car and you are residing anywhere in Norway and you have a parking, the RWA, the distribution company, the transport department, no one can stop you from setting up a charging infrastructure.
Fantastic.
So you apply, and I think within 2 weeks, the utility will come and install charging at your parking. Till date, there has not been a single fire incident in Norway. 90% of cars registered in Norway are electric. So I think a lot of it has to change. So I think government needs to come up with some kind of directive. Because if you leave it to people's whims and fancies, someone will agree, someone will not agree, and it will be always very challenging.
The last time I had this discussion with, I think, someone from the government or the advisory body, and they mentioned that there are guidelines, but we know what happens to guidelines.
So I'll tell you what's my personal experience. I've been telling my RWA to allow charging. They are saying, where is it written that I can allow you to set up charging? I talk to public agencies, they say, where it is written that you cannot set up charging. So I am stuck on this conversation was last 3 years.
Chicken and egg. Interesting. So, now it's time to conclude this conversation. I would just mention one point which we generally discuss. Would I suggest anyone to buy an electric car? I think for anyone who's watching, for me, very simple, criteria. If you have a charging point at your home or office, and you're not into long distance you're not going for long distance driving very often, then you should go for that. That could be your primary vehicle as well. This is what I feel. What do you think?
So I am personally biased, right? And I'll give this upfront. Absolutely, you should go ahead buy electric. Don't even think twice. And a couple of reasons I'm saying. Long distance is a little bit of myth. I have done with my wife 1,000 kilometers at a stretch, some remote places, and I could always find a 16 ampere plug to charge. So charging is not that big a
I
problem.
think that's what we call in internet or Instagram language confirmation bias.
Exactly.
Yeah, so this is what we generally don't agree on, because I have done long distances. At times, you feel that mental peace is more important, and at times you are ready to give those extra minutes or maybe 15, 20 extra minutes for that charging. That is where me and Amit generally don't agree. But so this is what you feel that everyone should go for electric anyway.
So there are a couple of reasons. So as a consumer, so if I remove my ICCT hat and just talk from purely a EV user, and I have a slightly older car, 3 years old, the ride quality that I get is unmatched. I have not tried very fancy cars, but whatever I've tried, 40, 50 lakh range, there is no vibration. It's very comfortable. I never get backache, even in long drives, which I used to get with my ICE car.
Okay.
So the ride quality is different. Second is we are getting much and much nicer products now.
Yeah, I agree.
So the quality of product is improving. So yeah, with all my personal bias, please go in for an electric.
Super. Thank you, Amit. Thank you for your time and this conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for watching. This is Green Bharat Road to Green conversation, and we'll keep having these kind of discussions. And in case you have some comments or feedback, do write into us. Thanks for watching.
Ola Electric presents Green Bharat, an initiative by Network 18.